You never really think life's gonna throw you a curveball like that. Honestly, I didn't see it coming at all. Everything was just rolling along, real predictable, nothing out of the ordinary. My wife and I had been married for years, and I figured everything was solid as a rock. I'm the kind of guy who values stability and order, you know? Discipline, loyalty, commitment. That's what I was raised on, and that's how I live. I always just assumed my wife was on the same page, no questions asked. I've always been pretty upfront. If there's a problem, you face it head on. No drama, no playing games. That's worked out for me in my job, and it worked in life too. People came to me when the tough calls needed to be made because I could handle the pressure without cracking. My wife knew that side of me right from the start. For me, respect, honesty, loyalty, those were the things that weren't up for debate. Now my wife, Lauren, she was different. She had this easygoing, social vibe. She could connect with people in ways I never could. I'm not one for small talk or mingling, but I didn't mind her being the outgoing one. In fact, it kind of balanced us out. She'd always tell me, "You can't control everything." I'd usually just laugh it off, but I knew deep down she really believed that. For me, though, control was everything. Even still, I never wanted to box her in. She had her space, and I had mine. I never had any reason to doubt her. I was busy with my work, and she had her own routine. We had this unspoken understanding, we respected each other's independence. She didn't question me, and I didn't question her. Looking back, maybe that was where I messed up. Maybe I should have paid more attention to her need for connection, but at the time, it didn't even cross my mind. I wasn't the jealous type, never saw a reason to be. I figured our bond was strong enough to handle anything. But the thing is, even the strongest bonds can get tested. And when they start to crack, it doesn't always blow up in your face right away. Sometimes it creeps in, quiet and slow. One evening, she came home with way more energy than usual. I was in the living room, going through some paperwork, and she dropped her bag by the door with a loud sigh, making sure I noticed her. "You won't believe this," she said, almost laughing. "We've decided to start doing some team building after work, you know, to get to know each other better." I glanced up, not thinking much of it. "Team building, huh?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She shrugged and sat down next to me. "Yeah, we've been working together for months, but we barely know each other outside of the office. We figured grabbing drinks or hitting a bar a couple of times a week might help us loosen up and get closer. Now, I've always had good relationships with the folks I work with. We'd go out for drinks or have BBQs at someone's place now and then, so the idea didn't seem weird to me at all." "Sounds good," I told her. "It's important to get to know the people you work with. It'll make everything smoother." She looked relieved when I said that. "I figured you'd get it. You're always good at balancing work and social stuff," she said, smiling. "I've never really done this kind of thing before. Usually, I keep work and personal life separate, but maybe this will be a good change." I nodded. From where I was sitting, it all seemed normal. People hanging out with their coworkers outside of work? Nothing unusual about that. She worked hard, and if this made her enjoy her job more, I didn't see any harm in it. I trusted her. We'd been together long enough that I had no doubt she wouldn't put herself in any kind of risky situation. That night, I didn't think twice about it. If anything, I was glad she was finding a way to connect with her coworkers. But what I didn't know then was that this whole team-building thing wasn't as innocent as I thought. It was the start of something that would slowly unravel everything I thought I had figured out. I remember the night of her first team-building outing pretty clearly. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just a regular evening, except she came home a little different. It was late, later than usual, and I was in the living room, half watching TV while waiting for her. The door opened with a loud thud, and she came in, a bit off balance. I looked over and knew right away she was drunk, not totally wasted, but tipsy enough that it was obvious. She kicked her shoes off by the door without a care and gave me this sheepish smile, trying to act like everything was normal. I asked casually, "How'd it go?" She giggled, her words slightly slurred. It was fun. You know how it is, a few drinks, everyone loosening up. She plopped down next to me on the couch, leaning back like she was wiped out. Then, almost like it was nothing, she added, there was this one drunk guy who got a little too close, though. That made me sit up straight. What guy? I asked, keeping my voice calm but with a little edge of concern. She waved it off with a flick of her hand and rolled her eyes. Oh, it was nothing. Just some random drunk guy trying to hit on me, but don't worry, my coworker stepped in and made sure he left me alone. He even walked me home. She said it like she was grateful, as if this colleague had done her a real favor. I kept my eyes on her, trying to figure out how she really felt about the whole thing, but she seemed totally unfazed, like it was just another part of her night. So, he walked you all the way home? I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as I could. Yeah, she nodded. But really, it's fine. I know how you get, but nothing happened. He's just a friend, making sure I got home safe. She looked at me, almost like she was waiting for some kind of reaction, but honestly, I didn't feel much right then. I've never been one to get jealous. I trusted her. Jealous? Nah, I said calmly. I just care that no one crossed the line. If he didn't touch you or try anything, it's cool. From what she was saying, it sounded like her colleague was just looking out for her, and I wasn't too worried. But still, there was this little feeling in the back of my mind that I couldn't shake, even though I didn't really understand why yet. I decided to let it go, telling myself it was no big deal. After that night, though, things started to shift, though it wasn't all at once. It was slow, subtle at first. Over the next few weeks, I noticed her phone buzzing more and more, especially in the evenings. Whether we were having dinner or just hanging out watching TV, her phone would be going off nonstop with messages. At first, I didn't think much of it. She's always been social, and this new team-building stuff probably meant she was just closer to her coworkers now. But as the days went on, it got harder to ignore. One evening, while we were sitting on the couch, her phone buzzed again, for what felt like the 100th time that day. I glanced over and casually asked, "Who's texting you so much?" Without missing a beat, she shrugged. "Oh, it's just a friend from work. She's been bugging me to join her for yoga classes. Honestly, I'm not really into it, but she's super persistent." She said it so casually, her tone light like it was no big deal. But all those notifications didn't really match how little she made it out to be. Still, I let it slide. If it was just a friend from work, there wasn't much to worry about, right? Then, a few days later, something happened that made that little gut feeling turn into something more. We were getting ready to head out, and she was rushing around, trying to gather her stuff. In her hurry, her phone slipped out of her hand and hit the floor with a loud crack. The screen shattered instantly. "Great," she muttered under her breath as she bent down to pick it up. I watched her for a moment, then stepped over to check it out. "Looks like we'll need a new one," I said, and she nodded, clearly annoyed. That evening, we went to the store and picked out a new phone for her. Within an hour, she had a brand new device in her hands. The old one, the one that had been buzzing like crazy, was now sitting broken, waiting to be repaired. She quickly transferred all her contacts and messages to the new phone, and everything seemed to go back to normal, or so I thought. The weird part was, after that, the yoga talk just kind of vanished. I didn't hear anything more about this friend, and I didn't push it. People fall out of touch all the time, and I had plenty of other things to think about. But then, even with the new phone, the constant messages didn't stop. Every day, her phone would light up with notifications, and it wasn't long before I started feeling uneasy. Nobody, I thought, spends that much time texting a friend from work, especially not about yoga classes. It just didn't add up. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder that uneasy feeling got. It kept gnawing at me, and even though I'm not usually the type to get paranoid, something just felt off. Her phone buzzing constantly didn't fit with the simple explanation she'd given me about some work friend and yoga. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. No one texts that much about something as casual as yoga. Then I remembered her old phone, the one that had broken and was still sitting there, gathering dust. I hadn't really thought much about it since we replaced it, but now, curiosity, and maybe something more, started to eat away at me. I needed answers, and maybe that phone had them. One afternoon, when she wasn't home, I decided to take the old phone to a repair shop. I told myself it was just to get it fixed, no big deal. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that I was just overthinking things. But another part of me needed to know. I wasn't the kind of guy who let doubts linger. A few days later, the phone was ready. I brought it home, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at it for a while. My stomach was in knots, but I knew I had to go through with it. I unlocked the phone and went straight to her Instagram messages. At first, everything seemed normal, just the usual back and forth with friends. But then I spotted his name. The colleague who walked her home that night from the bar. The one she swore was just a friend. My heart started to race as I opened their chat. What I saw wasn't just innocent small talk. There were pictures, intimate ones. And the messages? They weren't the kind of messages you'd send to someone who's just a friend. It was obvious this had been going on for a while. The way they talked to each other, the things they said, it made my blood boil. They had crossed every line imaginable. But what really twisted the knife was that he knew about me. This wasn't some clueless guy who didn't realize she was married. Oh no, he knew exactly who I was. And worse, he used it against her. One message, in particular, stopped me cold. Your husband's not a wall. He'll move out of the way eventually. And the worst part? She laughed. She actually laughed and agreed with him, like the whole thing was a joke. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the rage build inside me. But it wasn't the kind of anger that makes you lose control. No, this was something different, colder, more calculated. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to plan. If they thought I'd sit back and let them make a fool out of me in my own home, they had another thing coming. I wasn't the kind of man to be disrespected like that. They figured they were clever, sneaking around behind my back, but they didn't know who they were messing with. Now, I had all the information I needed. The truth was out in the open, and the advantage was mine. But I wasn't going to confront her right away. That'd be too easy. No, I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal. I wanted to catch them off guard, hit them where it hurt most. That night I waited. I knew she wasn't planning to go out, so it was the perfect time to set things in motion. She came home at the usual time, acting like everything was perfectly normal. She sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone, completely clueless about what was coming. I kept it together, didn't let on that I knew anything. We made the usual small talk, how her day was, what we should have for dinner. But in my mind, I was already 2 steps ahead. After a bit, I told her I needed to use the bathroom. She didn't suspect a thing. I got up, grabbed her phone from the table, and headed down the hall, making sure to close the door behind me. Once inside, I pulled out her old phone, the one I had gotten repaired. I logged into her Instagram account, and went straight to the chat with him. I typed out a message, short and to the point, don't ask questions. Just bring a bottle of wine and come over. My husband isn't home. I hit send and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. It didn't take long for him to reply. On my way, he wrote back. Just like that. No hesitation. He thought he had free access to my house, to my wife. Little did he know, he was walking straight into a trap. I put her phone back exactly where it was and strolled back into the living room like nothing had happened. She didn't even notice. She had no clue the guy she'd been sneaking around with was on his way, thinking I wasn't home. Everything was falling into place. Now, all I had to do was wait. The minutes crawled by, but I stayed cool. I'm not the type to lose my temper easily, and this wasn't about blowing up. This was about control over the situation, control over them. They thought they were slick, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Then, finally, the doorbell rang. I saw the confusion on her face as she glanced up from her phone, not expecting anyone. Who could that be? She mumbled, more to herself than to me. I stood up, doing my best to hide the satisfaction rising up inside me. "I'll get it," I said casually, like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was already smiling. I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that door. I walked over, heart racing but my face calm as ever. When I peeked through the peephole, there he was, standing there with a bottle of wine in hand and that smug look on his face. He had no idea what was about to hit him. I'd opened the door, and before he could even get a word out, I grabbed him by the collar. His eyes went wide, full of shock, as it finally hit him, way too late, that he had walked right into my trap. Without a word, I yanked him inside and slammed him against the wall. The bottle of wine slipped out of his hand, shattering on the floor, the red liquid splashing everywhere, looking too much like blood for comfort. I didn't even bother glancing at her. Right then, she didn't matter. All my focus was on this worthless piece of trash standing in front of me. With one swift move, I shoved him into the armchair, forcing him to sit down hard. He clutched his stomach, still trying to catch his breath, his eyes darting around the room, maybe searching for a way out. But there wasn't one. He wasn't going anywhere. He was trapped, and he knew it. I stood over him, fists clenched tight, the anger simmering just below the surface. "You think you're tough?" I growled, my voice low and menacing. "You think you can just walk into my house, mess around with my wife, and walk away like nothing happened?" He didn't respond. He was too winded to say a word, but the fear in his eyes told me he finally understood just how deep he'd gotten himself. I didn't let up. I grabbed him by the collar again, pulling him in closer. "You think you're special?" I spat. "You're nothing. Just some weak, pathetic guy preying on another man's wife because you can't get one of your own." I could feel my blood boiling, but I wasn't about to lose control. Not yet. I wanted him to feel every word, to understand the full weight of his mistake. He finally managed to stammer something, his voice shaky and scared. I didn't know." I cut him off, my voice sharp and dripping with contempt. "Bullshit. You knew exactly who I am. You knew she was married, and you still went after her." For the first time, I glanced over at my wife. She was standing there, wide-eyed, silent, like she didn't even recognize me. But this was the real me, the husband she betrayed. "And you," I said, turning to her, the fury in my voice unmistakable. "You had everything. A home. A husband who gave you everything you could ever need. And what did you do? You threw it all away for this." I gestured toward the man slumped in the chair. "For what? A cheap thrill?" She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. She knew there was no explanation that could justify what she'd done. The silence in the room felt suffocating, heavy with everything left unsaid. I turned back to him, my anger bubbling up again. "You think you're some big shot, huh? Thought you could sneak around behind my back and I'd never catch on?" I shook my head in disgust. "Well, guess what? You're both pathetic. One of you is a coward who goes after another man's wife, and the other is a woman who had it all and threw it away for someone like you. You two deserve each other." The guilt was clear on her face now, but I didn't care. It was too late for apologies, too late for excuses. The damage was done, and now they were both going to deal with the consequences. I grabbed him by the collar again and yanked him out of the chair. He barely resisted. Fear had completely taken over. I shoved him toward the door, making sure he felt the full weight of my anger with every step. I got right in his face, my voice low and dangerous. "If you even think about coming near her again, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" His eyes were wide with terror as he nodded, too scared to even speak. But I wasn't done. "You come near her again, and I swear, I'll make sure you never walk again. You'll spend the rest of your pathetic life in a wheelchair." I wasn't the kind of man to make empty threats, and I could see in his eyes that he knew I meant every word. I let go of him, giving him one last shove toward the door. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice cold as ice. He didn't need to be told twice. He stumbled out the door, nearly tripping over himself in his rush to leave, not daring to look back. As soon as he was gone, I turned around, the rage still coursing through me. My wife was standing there, still frozen in place, looking completely lost. She hadn't said a word the entire time, but I didn't care. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. Without saying a thing, I walked past her and headed straight to the bedroom. She followed me, her voice finally breaking through as she called my name, but I ignored her. I wasn't in the mood to hear whatever she had to say. I flung open the closet doors and started pulling out her clothes, yanking them off the hangers and tossing them onto the floor like they meant nothing. She came into the room, her voice shaky as she pleaded. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked over to the window and started throwing her things out, one by one, onto the ground below. Shirts, dresses, shoes, it all went flying. She stood there, panicked, trying to stop me, but her words didn't mean a damn thing to me anymore. "Please stop. Let's talk about this," she begged, her voice cracking. But it was too late for talking. Too late for anything. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I kept tossing her things out the window, not caring how they landed. In my mind, I was clearing out the remnants of our life together, just like she had tossed away our marriage. When most of her stuff was scattered outside, I finally turned to face her. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, looking desperate. But I felt nothing. Any sympathy or love I once had for her was long gone. "You're done here," I said, my voice cold and firm. "Pack up whatever's left and get out. I'm done with you." She just stared at me, stunned, like she couldn't believe I was serious. "You can't just throw me out like this," she said, her voice starting to rise with panic. But I wasn't hearing any of it. She made her bed, now she had to lie in it. I stepped closer, grabbed her by the arm, and pulled her toward the door. Her resistance was weak, like she knew deep down there was no way back from this. "Shut up," I hissed through clenched teeth. "Just shut your mouth." She kept trying to plead with me, her voice shaky and desperate, but I was beyond done. Done with the excuses, the lies, the weak attempts to justify what she had done. I covered her mouth with my hand, silencing her. "You've said enough," I told her, my voice cold. "It's over." Her eyes were wide with fear, but I didn't care anymore. There was nothing left to say. No way to fix it. I dragged her to the door, not giving her a chance to fight back, and flung it open. "I'm divorcing you," I said, my tone calm but firm. "It's done. There's no coming back from this. Get out of my house, and don't ever show your face here again." She stood there for a moment, frozen, like she couldn't believe this was really happening. But it was. This was the end, and I was more than ready for it. She stumbled out the door, her eyes wide with disbelief, and I slammed it shut behind her. The sound echoed through the silence. I stood there for a few moments, letting everything sink in. The betrayal, the lies, the anger, it was all over now. The life we'd built together, the memories we'd shared, it was all gone. But strangely enough, I didn't feel the weight of loss like I thought I would. Instead, I felt something else, relief. I walked over to the window and looked down at the pile of her stuff scattered on the ground. It was a mess, just like our marriage had become. But for the first time in a long while, the house felt lighter. Sure, it was empty, but in a way that made me feel free. I had taken back control of my life, and I wasn't being weighed down by her lies anymore. The divorce was the next step, and honestly, it was more of a formality at that point. Once I made the decision, things moved quickly. We both got lawyers, and the process started without much delay. I didn't drag it out with emotions or endless back-and-forth negotiations. I knew what I wanted: freedom. I didn't want anything from her, and thankfully, she didn't put up much of a fight. When we got to court, it felt surreal. There we were, sitting across from each other like strangers. She didn't even look like the woman I used to know. She looked hollow, like a ghost of her former self, worn down by the choices she'd made. The tension was thick in the room, but I felt nothing for her. No sadness, no regret. I'd already made peace with what happened, and I was ready to move on. The judge spoke, and in a matter of minutes, it was over. "You are officially divorced," he declared. Just like that, it was done. I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I was free, but at the same time, I found myself wondering what that freedom really meant. What was next? After the divorce, I threw myself into work. It was the one thing I could always rely on, the one place where I felt completely in control. I started putting in extra hours, diving deep into projects. For the first time in years, I felt truly focused. The distraction of my broken marriage was gone, and with it out of the way, I found clarity again. But work wasn't the only thing I'd let slip during those years. Over time, I'd slowly drifted away from my friends, always putting my relationship above everything else. After the divorce, I started reaching out, reconnecting with people I hadn't seen in years. I began going out more, grabbing drinks, laughing, and actually enjoying life again. It felt like I had been asleep for years, and now I was finally waking up. Being around people who knew me before all the chaos helped me remember who I really was. I wasn't just the guy who got cheated on, I was more than that. And slowly, I started to feel like myself again. The pain of her betrayal still lingered, but it didn't weigh me down anymore. Each day, I felt lighter, more in control of my own life. As for her, I heard through mutual friends that she was struggling after the divorce. Apparently, she moved back in with her parents. From what I gathered, she was having a hard time accepting the reality of her choices. The life she thought she wanted with someone else had crumbled, leaving her alone and full of regret. Did I feel sorry for her? Not in the slightest. She made her decisions, and now she had to live with them. I had no sympathy for someone who tossed everything away for a few moments of excitement, only to realize too late that it wasn't worth it. As the months went by, I started noticing changes in myself. I became more guarded, a little more careful when it came to trusting people. But oddly enough, I also felt stronger. I wasn't in any rush to jump into another relationship. I wanted to take my time, figure out what I truly wanted. I'd learned the hard way that trust is fragile, that it has to be earned, not taken for granted. The whole experience had left me cautious, but not bitter. I refused to let what happened define me. I wasn't going to be known as the guy who got cheated on for the rest of my life. Instead, I focused on rebuilding a new foundation, one I had complete control over. I had taken back my life, and this time, I was going to do it right. Eventually, I started dating again, but I approached it with more care. Slowly, cautiously. I didn't just jump in head first or let emotions sweep me away. I made sure that whoever I spent time with was upfront, honest, and independent. I found myself drawn to women who had their lives together, who didn't rely on anyone else to make them happy. It was a refreshing change, and little by little, I started opening up again. Each date was a small step toward healing, and for the first time in a while, I actually enjoyed the process. I wasn't in a rush to settle down. For the first time in a long time, I was just enjoying getting to know people, free from the weight of betrayal hanging over me. Looking back, I realized that the divorce wasn't just an ending, it was also a new beginning. I had shed the weight of a toxic relationship and came out the other side stronger and more aware of who I was. I wasn't just a man who'd been betrayed. I was someone who had learned valuable lessons about myself, about relationships, and about the importance of trust. The future still felt uncertain, but for once, I was okay with that. I didn't need all the answers right away. I was back in control of my life, and that was enough. I found myself thinking less and less about her, and more about the life I was building for myself. That sense of freedom felt like a second chance at happiness, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready to face it head on. The storm had passed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe again. In the end, divorce gave me something I didn't even realize I needed, a fresh start. And as I moved forward, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't the same person I used to be. I was stronger, smarter, and ready to take on whatever life had in store for me. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the start of a new chapter. Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support and for tuning into my stories on YouTube. Your enthusiasm and feedback mean the world to me. Stay tuned for more exciting tales. Warm regards.